Our Moravian text reading for today is John chapter 6 verse 1 through to 15. The fourth of 7 miraculous signs in John's Gospel. Jesus feeds the 5,000. And hopefully you saw in verse 14 how for the people, the crowds, this was a sign, a signpost pointing to the true nature of King Jesus. It revealed him as the prophet, not just a prophet. And that is important because back in Deuteronomy 18, verse 15, Moses, known as the prophet, prophesied that one day God would raise up someone like him, a deliverer. And that's who the Jews were waiting for, their Messiah. No wonder they wanted to make him king after this miracle. Only they wanted to make him king in their way, at their time, by force. Which is ironic, isn't it? Because if someone is a king, then you're going to have to do things their way, in their time, with their permission. So this whole miraculous provision happens to echo and mirror the miraculous provision for Israel in the wilderness. For 40 years, they were sustained by manna from heaven, the bread of heaven. Indeed, these 12 baskets that were left over are there to show that Jesus' provision was enough for all of the tribes of Israel, all of God's people, if only they would come to him for bread. I just want to point out something that I think is amazing about how John structures his gospel that we don't quite get from the Moravian text reading divisions. And it's how the miracles in John's gospel, the signs, relate to the sayings of Jesus, particularly the I am sayings. 7 signs, 7 sayings. So, for example, here Jesus breaks bread for them and feeds them. And then a little while later, when the disciples are discussing this miracle, chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. There is a fundamental inherent relationship between what Jesus does and who Jesus is. And that is more than academic. That is important for us as followers of Jesus. It means we can trust him for our daily bread, not because he has bread, but because he is our daily bread. It is who he is. It is in his nature. When we have him, when we have Jesus, we have the provision we need. And so as we go through John's gospel, hopefully you'll see that principle unfolding. Jesus opens the eyes of the blind man and then goes on to say, I am the light of the world. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead and he goes on to say, I am the resurrection and the life. And you can map Jesus' miracles and his identity together in that way. Now, back to this reading today. So Jesus, the Good Shepherd, makes the people sit down in green pastures. It echoes Psalm 23. And then he takes this offering off this boy, this packed lunch. And it says the first thing that Jesus did was to give thanks. Jesus gave thanks for the little that he had. And that is such a powerful perspective, isn't it? How many times do we focus on our lack? How many times do we focus on what we don't have rather than having the eyes to see what God has already provided, what God has already placed in our hands? And as we see it, and as we give thanks for it, well, that's when the miraculous happens. And if you scan ahead to tomorrow's reading, verse 23, you'll see that John notices that detail too, thanksgiving and the miraculous. So let's be people today who have eyes to see the goodness and provision of God towards us in whatever situation and circumstance we face. But more than that, let's be people of faith. Like Hebrews 11 says, who consider the things that are not as if they are. Now, how can we do that? by giving thanks for the miracle here, now, today, in advance, before it happens. Because when we do that, that's when faith rises to believe God for the impossible. That's when our perspective changes. That's when we find satisfaction in Jesus in the waiting. So give thanks for your miracle this day. Amen.